Think you know everything about classic TV westerns? This forgotten ABC series had a game show legend as producer, inspired a Tarantino film decades later, and featured a star whose friendship with James Dean sparked wild Hollywood rumors. From Confederate caps to Empire Strikes Back connections, the Rebels' two-season run was stranger than fiction. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Rebel, 1959 to 1961. Fact 1. Game show kings made a Western. When you think of Mark Goodson and Bill Todman, you probably think of contestants guessing prices or panelists asking yes or no questions, not cowboys riding through the Wild West. The legendary production duo behind some of television's most enduring game shows decided to take an unexpected detour into dramatic programming with The Rebel in 1959. Goodson and Todman had built an empire creating shows like The Price is Right, Family Feud, What's My Line, and I've Got a Secret, but The Rebel represented one of their rare ventures outside the game show format. The company, known as Goodson-Todman Productions, also produced two other westerns during this period, Jefferson Drum and Branded, but these experiments in dramatic television were few and far between compared to their game show output. The decision to produce The Rebel showed that even the masters of studio-based quiz shows were willing to embrace the Western craze that dominated television during the late 1950s and early 1960s. While Goodson focused on the creative aspects of their productions, Todman typically handled the business side, and this division of labor served them well across all their ventures. The partnership between these two producers became one of the most successful in television history, spanning decades and creating content that continues to air today. Their involvement with The Rebel remains a fascinating footnote in their careers, proving that sometimes even the most specialized producers were willing to saddle up and try something completely different from their usual format. Fact 2. Nick Adams was the only star. Most television westerns of the late 1950s relied on ensemble casts to share the burden of weekly production, but The Rebel took a completely different approach that was almost unheard of at the time. Nick Adams stood alone as the only regular cast member throughout all 76 episodes of the series, appearing in every single scene and carrying the entire show on his shoulders without any recurring supporting characters to help shoulder the load. This meant that Adams had to be in front of the camera constantly, with guest stars rotating in and out each week, but never staying around long enough to develop ongoing storylines or relationships. The format was exhausting for Adams, who was not only the star, but also heavily involved in the show's creation, writing, and production decisions. Unlike shows such as Bonanza or Gunsmoke, which featured stable casts of regular characters that audiences could follow week after week, The Rebel focused entirely on Johnny Yuma's solitary journey through the post-Civil War West. This unique structure gave the series a lonely, almost existential quality that set it apart from other westerns of the era. Adams brought an intensity to every episode that fell somewhere between brooding and simmering, with little emotion other than bursts of anger when confronted with injustice. The decision to make Adams the sole regular also meant there was no safety net if he fell ill or needed time off, making the production schedule incredibly demanding and placing enormous pressure on the young actor to perform consistently week after week for 2 full seasons. Fact 3. Elvis lost to Johnny Cash. One of the most interesting behind-the-scenes battles on The Rebel never made it to the screen, but involved two of the biggest names in music history competing for the same job. Nick Adams had become close friends with Elvis Presley during the mid-1950s and naturally wanted the King to perform the theme song for his new television series, believing that Elvis's voice would be perfect for capturing the rebellious spirit of Johnny Yuma. Adams pushed hard for Elvis to get the gig, but the producers at Goodson-Todman Productions had different ideas and insisted on hiring Johnny Cash instead, feeling that Cash's deeper, more weathered voice better suited the post-Civil War setting and the character's haunted demeanor. Cash recorded the theme song, which was officially titled The Rebel, but became widely known as The Ballad of Johnny Yuma, with music composed by Richard Markowitz and lyrics written by series co-creator Andrew J. Finati. The song's success proved the producers right, as it went on to reach number 24 on the country charts in 1961 and was later recognized by the Western Writers of America as one of the top 100 Western songs of all time. Cash's version wasn't released as a single until April of 1961, shortly before the show went off the air. but it became one of his memorable recordings from that period. The theme perfectly captured the lonely, restless quality of the show's protagonist, with Cash's distinctive voice delivering lines about a rebel wandering alone through the West. While we'll never know what Elvis's version might have sounded like, Johnny Cash's recording became inseparable from the show's identity and remains one of the most recognizable television theme songs from the golden age of Westerns. Fact 4. The future Empire Strikes Back. Director long before Irvin Kershner became known for directing one of the most beloved films in the Star Wars saga, he was cutting his teeth on a scrappy Western television series that most people have forgotten. Kershner directed more than 30 episodes of The Rebel between 1959 and 1961, making him responsible for nearly half of the show's total 76-episode run, and establishing himself as the series' primary visual storyteller. The director brought a creative eye for camera angles and composition that made The Rebel feel more cinematic than many other low-budget westerns of the era, often using contained settings in ways that created a sense of strategic placement and psychological tension. Kershner's work on The Rebel caught the attention of George Lucas, who had actually been a film student of Kershner's at the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts years earlier. When Lucas was looking for someone to direct The Empire Strikes Back in 1978, he remembered his former professor's talent for character-driven storytelling and offered him the job. Kershner initially turned down the opportunity because he didn't think he could possibly improve upon the original Star Wars film, but Lucas convinced him by promising to focus on visual effects at Skywalker Ranch while leaving directorial control to Kershner. The experience directing hundreds of scenes for The Rebel had prepared Kershner well for the demands of a major motion picture, teaching him how to work quickly and efficiently while still maintaining visual interest and emotional depth. When Kershner passed away in 2010 at the age of 87, his obituaries rightfully celebrated his work on The Empire Strikes Back, but his extensive television work, including his formative time on The Rebel, had been crucial in developing the skills that made him such an effective director for one of cinema's greatest sequels. Fact 5. Dan Blocker's pre-Bonanza role. The pilot episode of The Rebel, titled Johnny Yuma, featured a large, imposing actor named Dan Blocker playing the main villain, a gang leader named Del Pierce who has taken control of Johnny Yuma's hometown and murdered his father. Blocker brought real menace to the role, making audiences forget that he was soon destined to become one of television's most beloved gentle giants. This appearance in 1959 came right at the crucial moment when Blocker was transitioning from playing heavies and bad guys to landing the role that would define his career. Just after finishing his work on the Rebel pilot, Blocker was cast as Eric Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza, a part that producer David Dortort had specifically written with Blocker in mind after working with him on earlier productions. The contrast between Pierce, the ruthless villain in The Rebel, and Hoss, the lovable and good-natured son on Bonanza, showed Blocker's impressive range as an actor. Series co-creator Andrew J. Fenady later recalled that this was one of the last things Dan Blocker did before starting work on the Bonanza pilot, making The Rebel one of his final opportunities to play a truly menacing antagonist. Blocker stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed about 300 pounds, making him an imposing physical presence that worked perfectly for intimidating heroes, but it was his warm personality and genuine acting talent that allowed him to transform into the beloved Hoss character. The Rebel pilot showed audiences a side of Dan Blocker that would rarely be seen again once Bonanza made him a household name, preserving a glimpse of what might have been if he had continued playing villains instead of becoming one of television's most endearing good guys. Fact 6. A family affair on set. Nick Adams's personal and professional lives became intertwined in 1959 when he met Carol Nugent, a former child actress, during the filming of The Rebel's 3rd episode titled Yellow Hair. In this episode, Nugent played a fictional adopted white daughter of the historical Kiowa chief Satanta, appearing in a black wig to portray the character despite being a blonde in real life. The on-screen chemistry apparently carried over into real life, and Adams and Nugent married later that same year, making their meeting on The Rebel set the beginning of what would become a complicated relationship. Adams decided to make the 2nd season of The Rebel even more of a family affair by bringing his wife back to appear in additional episodes and even featuring their infant daughter Allison in Season 2. When explaining this decision to the press, Adams casually remarked that they might as well get everyone into the act and joked that he couldn't let Carol spend all her time doing housework. Their son, Jeb Stuart Adams, was born on April 10, 1961, giving the couple 2 young children by the time The Rebel ended its run. However, the marriage that began so romantically on a television set would eventually fall apart, with Carol filing for divorce in 1965, after increasingly acrimonious disputes that included allegations of violence and a bitter custody battle over their children. The episode Yellow Hair remains a time capsule of happier times, capturing the moment when Nick Adams met the woman who would become his wife and the mother of his children, all while dressed in period costumes and performing scenes about a Confederate soldier's adventures in the Old West. Fact 7. Controversial drug addiction episode television in 1960 rarely tackled subjects as serious as drug addiction, especially not in half-hour Western shows. But The Rebel pushed boundaries with an episode that proved too controversial for its original air date. Night on a Rainbow told the story of Ted Evans, a drummer from Johnny Yuma's Confederate regiment who has become addicted to pain medication in the year following the Civil War, struggling with both his physical dependence and the psychological trauma of the war itself. The episode showed Yuma arriving to help his old friend break the habit while dealing with interference from an unscrupulous druggist who profits from Evans' addiction. Network executives at ABC initially pulled the episode from the broadcast schedule, concerned that the subject matter was too mature or potentially troubling for the show's audience and might generate complaints from sponsors or viewers. However, after reconsideration and some internal debate, the network finally allowed Night on a Rainbow to air on May 29, 1960, where it generated an overwhelming reaction from viewers who praised the show for addressing a serious issue. The episode featured strong performances from guest stars, including James Best, who would later become famous as Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane on The Dukes of Hazzard, bringing emotional weight to the story of a man trying to escape his demons. Series co-creator Andrew J. Finati later described this as one of the most powerful episodes they produced, noting that the show had tackled drug addiction in a thoughtful way decades before it became a common topic on television. The controversy surrounding Night on a Rainbow demonstrated that Westerns could address contemporary social issues even while set in the 1860s, using historical distance to explore problems that were still affecting Americans in the modern era. Fact 8. Canceled despite huge success. The Rebel was doing everything right by the standards of television success in 1961, commanding an impressive 35% share of the Sunday evening audience in its 9 to 9:30 p.m. time slot. Yet ABC still pulled the plug on the series in one of the era's more baffling cancellation decisions. The network had actually gone beyond just renewing The Rebel for a 3rd season and had developed plans for an ambitious expansion called The Rebel and the Yank, which would have transformed the show into an hour-long format, pairing Nick Adams as Johnny Yuma with a former Union soldier named the Yank, who worked as a doctor in the post-war South. Actor James Drury had already been cast to play this new character, and scripts were being developed to explore the dynamic between these two former enemies trying to heal a divided nation. However, ABC was shifting its programming strategy and decided that despite the Rebel's strong ratings, the show's violent content didn't fit with the network's new direction toward more family-friendly entertainment and something called counter-programming, where they would schedule different types of shows against their competitors rather than trying to beat them at their own game. The cancellation was reportedly also influenced by a 1961 congressional hearing that mentioned The Rebel as one of the most popular shows watched by young offenders at juvenile correctional facilities, raising concerns about connections between violent television and juvenile delinquency. ABC decided to replace The Rebel with The Steve Allen Show, a variety program that they hoped would attract a different audience. But Allen's show lasted less than 4 months before being canceled itself. The failed spin-off, The Rebel and the Yank, never made it past the planning stages, though James Drury would go on to star in The Virginian, which became one of the longest-running westerns in television history, showing what might have been if the appended Rebel concept had been given a chance. Fact 9. Seinfeld's obscure reference. More than 30 years after The Rebel went off the air, the show received an unexpected moment of recognition from one of television's biggest comedies when Seinfeld referenced Johnny Yuma not once but twice during its run in the 1990s. The most memorable reference came in the second season episode titled The Heart Attack, which originally aired in April of 1991, featuring a scene where Kramer defends a holistic healer named Tor Ekman to a skeptical Jerry Seinfeld. During their argument, Kramer insists that Ekman is a rebel who is being persecuted by the medical establishment, to which Jerry immediately responds with the deadpan line, "A rebel? No. Johnny Yuma was a rebel. Ekman is a nut." The line got a laugh from audiences who were old enough to remember the show, while younger viewers probably had no idea what Jerry was talking about, making it one of Seinfeld's more obscure pop culture references. In another episode, Kramer absent-mindedly sings part of the theme song while on hold during a phone call, which might have been improvised by actor Michael Richards, who would have been old enough to remember watching the original series during his childhood. These references introduced the rebel to a whole new generation of viewers, even if most of them had to look up what Johnny Yuma was after hearing the jokes. The fact that Seinfeld writers chose to reference such an obscure Western from 3 decades earlier shows the kind of deep-cut television knowledge that made the show feel smart and rewarding for viewers who caught the references. For the rebel, these brief mentions represented a kind of cultural immortality, ensuring that Johnny Yuma's name would live on in syndicated reruns long after the original series had been largely forgotten by mainstream audiences. Fact 10. Tarantino's borrowed plot. When Quentin Tarantino released The Hateful Eight in 2015, sharp-eyed Western fans immediately noticed some striking similarities to a 55-year-old episode of The Rebel titled Fair Game, raising questions about whether the acclaimed director had drawn inspiration from the forgotten television series. The Rebel episode, which originally aired on March 27, 1960, and was directed by future Star Wars director Irvin Kershner, featured a group of strangers waiting overnight at a stagecoach depot, including a bounty hunter named Farnham, his handcuffed female prisoner, Cynthia Kenyon, and several other travelers who may not be who they claim to be. The similarities to The Hateful Eight are remarkably specific, including the setting at a way station where travelers are forced to wait together, a beautiful female, prisoner in handcuffs, and most notably a bounty hunter who is poisoned and dies, leading to suspicions about who among the group is responsible. In both stories, the female prisoner tries to negotiate deals with other characters, and the confined setting creates mounting tension as it becomes clear that not everyone will survive until morning. Film critic Joe Layden first pointed out these parallels in an article for Cowboys and Indians magazine, noting that while Tarantino has always been open about borrowing from and paying homage to earlier films, he never specifically mentioned The Rebel as an influence when discussing The Hateful Eight. Tarantino told Deadline that he had been inspired by classic TV westerns like Bonanza and The Virginian, where shows would periodically feature episodes about characters being taken hostage, but Fair Game seems like an even more direct template. It's entirely possible that Tarantino saw the episode during his childhood when The Rebel was airing in syndication, and the plot lodged in his subconscious, waiting to reemerge decades later when he was writing his own snowy western mystery about suspicious strangers trapped together. Fact 11. The Johnny Cash theme disappeared. When The Rebel went into syndication after its original network run ended in 1961, longtime fans of the show encountered a jarring change that fundamentally altered their viewing experience. Johnny Cash's iconic theme song, which had become inseparable from the show's identity and was considered one of the best television themes of its era, was suddenly replaced with a generic instrumental track called Dodge City No. 1, composed by Jack Tromby for the DeWolf Music Library. The substitution was almost certainly made because of licensing costs, as Cash's recording rights would have required ongoing royalty payments every time an episode aired, cutting into the profits that distributors hoped to make from selling the show to local stations. This practice of replacing original music in syndication was unfortunately common during the 1960s and 70s, but it was particularly disappointing for The Rebel because the theme song had been such an integral part of the show's appeal. Fans who discovered the series through syndicated reruns or later DVD releases often had no idea they were missing Cash's performance unless they happened to read about it or notice that the closing credits still listed Cash despite the instrumental opening. The DeWolf Library track was professionally produced and fit the Western genre, but it lacked the personality and distinctive quality that made Cash's version so memorable. turning what had been a signature element of the Rebel into something generic and forgettable. When the complete series was finally released on DVD by Timeless Media Group in 2015, fans hoped the original theme would be restored. But licensing issues continued to plague the release, leaving many wondering if they would ever be able to experience the Rebel the way audiences had in 1959, when Cash's voice welcomed them into Johnny Yuma's world each week. Fact 12. Nick Adams recorded his own version. Not content to let Johnny Cash have all the glory, Nick Adams decided to record his own version of the Rebel theme song, releasing it through Mercury Records in March of 1960 with the catalog number 71607. Adams apparently felt that as both the star and co-creator of the series, he should have a version of the theme that he could perform and promote, possibly hoping to capitalize on the show's success by selling records to fans who wanted a souvenir of their favorite TV Western. The decision to record his own competing version suggests that Adams may not have been entirely satisfied with Cash's interpretation, or perhaps he simply saw an opportunity to generate additional income from a song that was closely associated with his character. Unfortunately for Adams, his version never achieved anywhere near the popularity of Johnny Cash's recording, which makes sense given that Cash was already an established country music star with a distinctive voice and style that had earned him a devoted following. Mercury Records was a respected label that had released music by major artists, but even their promotional muscle couldn't turn Adams's version into a hit when it was competing against the authentic voice that most people had come to associate with the show. The existence of two different recorded versions of the same theme song created a small footnote in television history, representing the tension that sometimes existed between stars and the production decisions made around them. Adams's recording has become a curiosity for collectors and hardcore fans of the Rebel, representing an alternate universe version of what might have been if the star had been allowed to sing his own theme song from the beginning, though it's hard to imagine that his version would have been included in the Western Writers of America's list of top 100 Western songs. Fact 13. A teenage Western for baby boomers. At a time when most television Westerns were aimed at general audiences with an emphasis on appealing to adults, ABC made a deliberate decision to market the Rebel as something completely new. Television's first teenage Western, specifically designed to capture the attention of younger viewers who might not be interested in traditional horse operas. The network and producers recognized that the baby boomer generation was becoming an increasingly important demographic, and they crafted Johnny Yuma as a character who would resonate with teenagers even though the actor playing him, Nick Adams, was actually 28 years old when the series premiered. The character was designed to embody the kind of restless, rebellious spirit that teenagers could identify with, rejecting authority and wandering, alone through the world while searching for meaning and justice on his own terms. ABC made a big deal about the fact that Nick Adams had co-starred with James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, explicitly connecting Johnny Yuma to the Dean persona that had become iconic among young people in the mid-1950s. The marketing strategy worked, with the show frankly designed to appeal to a young audience and becoming a series that teenagers would specifically tune in to watch, which was unusual for Westerns at the time. The teenage appeal came not just from the character's rebellious nature, but also from Adams's performance style, which featured brooding intensity and sudden bursts of emotion that felt more psychologically complex than the stoic heroes of other Westerns. A New York Times article from the time noted that The Rebel was deliberately crafted to be a show that teenagers would embrace, recognizing that this demographic had spending power and could influence family viewing decisions. The concept of the teenage Western didn't spawn many imitators, making The Rebel a unique experiment in trying to blend two seemingly incompatible genres, the traditional Western and the emerging youth culture of the early 1960s. Fact 14. Producer appeared as General Sheridan Andrew J. Finati, who co-created The Rebel with Nick Adams and served as the series' primary writer and producer, decided to step in front of the camera twice during the show's run, most notably casting himself as Union General Philip Sheridan in an episode titled Johnny Yuma at Appomattox. The episode must have been a dream come true for Finati, who got to wear a Union Army uniform and share scenes with accomplished character actor George McCready, who played Confederate General Robert E. Lee in what was presumably a fictionalized depiction of events surrounding the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse in April of 1865. For a writer and producer to cast himself in such a significant historical role was an unusual choice, especially playing opposite a well-known actor like McCready, but Finati apparently felt comfortable enough with his abilities to put himself in front of the camera for this important episode. The decision to appear in his own show twice suggests that Finati was deeply invested in The Rebel beyond just the business side of production, seeing it as a creative outlet where he could explore his own interests in the Civil War and its aftermath. Finati's second appearance in the series has been less well documented, but his role as Sheridan remains the more memorable of the two, representing a moment when the man behind the scenes stepped into the world he had created. After The Rebel ended, Finati went on to write and produce other television westerns, including Branded with Chuck Connors and Hondo with Ralph Tager, as well as the John Wayne film Chisholm in 1970, establishing himself as a specialist in the genre. His willingness to appear on camera demonstrated the kind of hands-on involvement that was common in early television production, when the lines between different creative roles were more fluid and someone might serve as writer, producer, and actor all on the same project. Fact 15. Star's tragic end. At 36. 7 years after The Rebel aired its final episode, Nick Adams was found dead in his Beverly Hills home on February 7, 1968, bringing a tragic end to a life that had been marked by ambition, talent, controversy, and personal struggles. His lawyer and friend Irvin Roeder discovered the body after Adams failed to show up for a dinner meeting, breaking a window to enter the house and finding Adams's lifeless form propped against a wall in his bedroom. The coroner determined that Adams had died from an overdose of formaldehyde mixed with other drugs he had been taking to treat nervous disorders and alcoholism, but the official cause of death was listed as accidental suicidal and undetermined, leaving questions that would never be fully answered. Adams was only 36 years old at the time of his death, and his final years had been marked by declining career prospects, a bitter divorce from Carol Nugent that included allegations of violence and custody battles over their children, and increasing reliance on prescription medications. Some 2,000 mourners attended his funeral in Berwick, Pennsylvania, where he was buried with military honors due to his Coast Guard service, and his gravestone features a distinctive silhouette of Johnny Yuma wearing the Confederate cap that had become Adams's most recognizable image. The back of the gravestone is inscribed, "Nick Adams, the Rebel, actor of Hollywood screens," ensuring that even in death he would be remembered primarily for the role that had brought him his greatest success. Adams has sometimes been listed alongside James Dean, Natalie Wood, and Sal Mineo as victims of the so-called Rebel Without a Cause curse, an urban legend suggesting that the cast of that film was doomed to tragic early deaths, though this is purely coincidental, and all four simply happened to die relatively young under different circumstances.